Since time immemorial, war has been regarded as the ultimate manifestation of suffering and death. It is an unyielding force, ignited by the desires of individuals, and it ends only when one side is rendered powerless. In the relentless chaos of battle, death looms large, leaving little room for reflection. To survive, combatants often discard empathy and kindness, viewing these traits as weaknesses that have no place in the heat of conflict. Yet among those fighting for humanity, there arose one who understood that to remain inactive in the face of mercy was a greater crime than killing. In the midst of warfare, the strongest must demonstrate compassion for the weak. Enter Vulkan, a noble warrior and demigod who has always remembered the importance of humanity. His journey began when his incubation pod landed on the harsh and inhospitable world of Nocturne in the Ultima Segmentum. This realm is documented in the Imperial Archives as a place fraught with peril, burdened by intense radiation, a lethal climate, and relentless volcanic activity. But these threats pale in comparison to the greater peril that the people of Nocturne faced. Every 15 years, the orbits of Nocturne and its colossal moon, Prometheus, draw perilously close, creating gravitational forces capable of tearing them apart. These intervals are known as times of trials, marked by catastrophic tidal waves, simultaneous volcanic eruptions, and earthquakes that reshape the very land. Historically, such disasters have claimed the lives of countless individuals. Moreover, the subsequent years of darkness and crop failures added to the toll. Mockingly, the Dark Eldar transformed Nocturne into a grisly playground for their cruel games. The most horrifying aspect of their raids was that the locals, numbed by constant fear, did not resist, but instead built shelters, quietly hiding as their kin were taken. Yet, prophecy foretold the arrival of a savior. During one destructive cycle, a brilliant flash appeared against the backdrop of ash and fire, marking Vulkan's arrival. Discovered by a blacksmith named Nobel, the infant sparked hope in the heart of the weary man. Initially perceiving him as either a miracle or a punishment, Nobel's fears faded upon hearing the child's cries. He assumed the baby was hurt, given the flaming crater left by the landing, but quickly realized the child was unharmed. His cries were not from pain, but rather from a profound longing for connection. Thus began Vulkan's story, destined to become a champion for the defenseless in a world ravaged by turmoil. He stood as a beacon of hope, reminding all that even in the darkest times, compassion and strength can flourish. Determined to raise the extraordinary child as his own, Nobel made the decision to conceal the capsule that had brought the infant to him, hiding it in his yard. He resolved to reveal the truth of Vulkan's origins only when the child was mature enough to grasp the significance. In homage to an ancient deity, he named the boy Vulkan and welcomed him into his home, teaching him the skills of blacksmithing and weapon crafting. In an astonishing display of growth, the child matured rapidly, reaching his full height in just 3 years. Young Vulkan exceeded every native of Nocturne in strength and displayed a remarkable intellect and wisdom that distinguished him from others. The culture of cooperation present among the planet's inhabitants, coupled with the love and guidance of his father, fostered in the young Primarch a deep respect for the lives of the most vulnerable. 4 years after the pod's arrival, Nobel sensed it was time to reveal Vulkan's true origins. Recognizing that the stark contrast between his son and the rest of the population weighed heavily on his heart, he chose a quiet evening to share the truth. He guided Vulkan to the hidden capsule, which lay a short distance from the forge in a specially excavated cellar, carefully concealed beneath a broken anvil for safety. As Vulkan assisted his aging father in opening the entrance, he hesitated, refraining from stepping into the hidden place that held the truth of his extraterrestrial beginnings. In stark contrast to Nobel's worries, the young Primarch exhibited no signs of distress regarding his origins. He viewed Nocturne as his true home and cherished the old blacksmith who had taught him the ways of hunting and craftsmanship, much like a father would. All else felt inconsequential. Just as Nobel was about to share the truth about Vulkan's celestial birth, the planet fell under attack from the Drukhari, leaving no room for such revelations. Grasping his son's hand, Nobel urged Vulkan to seek safety, but the Primarch refused to flee. Armed with a hammer in each hand, he he boldly stepped forward to confront the invaders. The people of Nocturne referred to these Xenos as twilight spectres, infusing them with an air of supernatural terror. Yet, with decisive blows, Vulkan quickly proved that these phantoms were merely flesh and blood, susceptible to his might. He fought the Drukhari, using weapons and tearing them apart with his bare hands, freeing those who had been captured. His audacity inspired others, including Rebel, to muster the courage to defend their homeland alongside him. Vulkan single-handedly vanquished over 100 of the Xenos, only feeling a surge of fear when one of the Drukhari witches nearly struck down his father. The battle was fierce and brutal, but the defenders emerged victorious, repelling the invaders for the first time. News of this triumph spread, attracting inhabitants from neighboring cities who came to pay homage to Vulkan. Recognizing the reliance others had on him, the Primarch vowed to obliterate any enemy that threatened their safety, assuring the people of Nocturne that they would never again need to hide. Instead of conquering his world, the mightiest warrior found it bending before him, not out of fear, but out of deep respect and admiration. In celebration of their hard-won victory over the Eldar, the people decided to host a grand tournament, filled with contests of strength and skill familiar to the locals. However, during the opening ceremonies, a mysterious figure emerged, starkly contrasting with the dark-skinned inhabitants of Nocturne. His skin glimmered with an unnatural pallor, and his clothing was made of strange materials foreign to this primitive world. This enigmatic newcomer sought entry into the competitions, boldly asserting that he would outshine all other participants. Laughter erupted from the crowd at such audacity. Vulkan, their beloved champion, towered over this stranger and was far stronger, making him the clear favorite. The stranger issued a challenge to the young blacksmith's son, claiming that the loser would pledge eternal loyalty to the victor. Vulkan chuckled at the stranger's bravado, but accepted the challenge. Over the course of 8 days and nights, the tournament rigorously tested the fortitude of many brave competitors. Yet all attention remained fixed on the two formidable figures who were competing at an entirely different level. Throughout several events, the judges often declared matches between Vulkan and the stranger as draws, as determining a winner proved to be impossible. In one trial, both participants were tasked with lifting a heavy anvil and holding it above their heads longer than their peers. The fair-skinned stranger and Vulkan lifted the anvil effortlessly, standing firm for more than half a day, without showing any signs of fatigue. Similar results followed in subsequent trials, and by the end of the 8th day, a clear victor was still yet to emerge. To determine the champion at last, the elders proposed a thrilling conclusion to the competitions, a hunt for a salamander. Both contenders were given a span of 24 hours to craft their weapons and pursue one of Nocturne's elusive deep dragons. Acknowledging that what might be an insurmountable task for others would merely be a test for these formidable adversaries, the judges decreed that victory would go to whoever could capture the largest salamander. Hunting these legendary fire-breathing beasts, known for their ability to spew lava from mountain peaks, was a cherished tradition among local heroes. Young Vulkan had gained a reputation as the most successful deep dragon hunter in the area. He set to work crafting a massive warhammer, while his rival chose to forge a razor-sharp sword. As twilight descended, both competitors began their ascent up the towering volcano aptly named Deathfire, which was rumoured to harbour the most massive and fearsome salamanders within its fiery bowels. Vulkan was the first to encounter his prey, delivering a single powerful blow with his hammer that decapitated the beast. However, as he prepared to descend the mountain with his trophy in hand, an unexpected earthquake struck, triggering a violent eruption of lava. Vulkan found himself in a desperate situation, precariously dangling over a molten chasm, gripping the cliff edge with one hand while clutching the lifeless dragon with the other. Time dragged on, and he soon realized that even his extraordinary strength could not keep him suspended above the searing lake forever. Just then the stranger reappeared beside him, triumphantly displaying a colossal salamander he had slain. Recognizing Vulkan's perilous state, the stranger swiftly cast his own catch into the lava, using its fireproof hide as a makeshift bridge to save him. When they returned, the exuberant crowd hailed Vulkan as the champion for bringing back the massive reptile, while the stranger stood empty-handed. However, Vulkan silenced the raucous cheers and knelt before his rival, proclaiming that a man who prioritizes another's life over his own pride deserves unwavering loyalty. In that pivotal moment, the stranger revealed his true identity as the Emperor of Mankind. The Emperor explained to Vulkan that he was the boy's true father and spoke of the other Primarchs, detailing their shared monumental mission. Although the Emperor's words were filled with awe and promise, Vulkan hesitated to pledge his allegiance. A deep sorrow filled him at the thought of leaving Nocturne unprotected, fearing for its future without his guidance. Yet his father urged him to respond to the call of duty, emphasizing the plight of countless worlds suffering under the weight of cosmic horrors. Regarding Vulkan's homeland, now part of the Imperium, the Emperor assured him of a peaceful future safeguarded by the 18th Legion, created from Vulkan's own blood. Unlike many of the Primarchs before him, the one who would soon be known as the Lord of Drakes posed numerous questions before agreeing to serve the Emperor. Some of these inquiries remained unanswered. Vulkan viewed himself as a humble man, but he was no fool. He was determined to uncover the true intentions of the being who sought to take him from his cherished homeland. With a heart full of joy, the Emperor of Mankind explained to Vulkan that his remarkable transformation was not the result of magic, but rather the culmination of advanced scientific achievements. He shared insights into his laboratory and the creation of the Primarchs, revealing his ambitious vision to save humanity, a mission for which he was willing to make any sacrifice. The Emperor painted a picture of a future where mankind could flourish in a sublime and eternal existence. However, Vulkan pressed further, questioning, was it the Emperor's intention that his own sons would be cast into the void, scattered across realms of fire, ice, and death? The Emperor's ambiguous response indicated to Vulkan that certain truths would forever be obscured from him. Vulkan understood the significant roles his brothers played within the Emperor's grand scheme and recognized the wisdom he could gain from these powerful commanders. Identifying as a blacksmith, a creator dedicated to fostering peace rather than chaos, he sought to understand his unique purpose in this elaborate plan and what he could teach the other Primarchs. In the early years of his service under the Emperor, Vulkan remained largely isolated, training directly under his father's guidance without engaging with his fellow warriors. It was believed that his existence was a closely guarded secret, known only to the other Primarchs already discovered. During this period, he honed his skills in military strategy, history, and science, showcasing not only a sharp intellect but also a rare blend of wisdom and compassion, traits some considered at odds with his destined role as a warlord. In combat, Vulkan fought alongside the Emperor, donning emerald armor that echoed the ancient dragons of Terran mythology. His time spent in the weapon forges of Mars solidified a close bond with his brother, Ferrus Manus. The Emperor had intentionally paired them in battle, allowing them to discover hidden strengths within themselves and each other. When Ferrus Manus spotted an enemy missile aimed at Vulkan, he ignored reason and plunged into the chaos, desperate to reach his brother. Even as he feared he might not arrive in time, a new sense of urgency drove him forward. Upon finding Vulkan, he saw that his brother had survived, albeit with his helmet lost and armor battered, his body stained with blood. Yet cradled against Vulkan's chest was a 1-year-old girl, terrified but unharmed, whom he had shielded from a direct hit. Ferrus was struck by the stark contrast between Vulkan's fierce exterior and the kindness radiating from within him. Vulkan was willing to sacrifice himself for those weaker, and as he gently held the child, his fellow warriors began to resonate with his noble spirit. This was precisely the role the Emperor envisioned for him, to instill in his warriors and brothers the profound importance of mercy. Years passed, and Vulkan finally felt ready to take charge of the 18th Legion's destiny. He chose to meet his sons for the first time, delivering an impassioned speech that expressed his deep understanding of their struggles and the burdens they bore. He promised that the fortunes of the Legion would change for he was not just a lord and mentor but also a father eager to share his knowledge with the newest recruits. This crucial gathering took place at a time of dire need. The Legion, commanded by Lord Commander Cassian Vaughan, was actively defending the Imperial worlds against the Orc onslaught in the Taras sector. At that moment, much of the Legion and its Astartes were preoccupied with the horrors of Rangdan or engaged in long-range missions, rendering them unable to swiftly respond to the invasion. Thus, the 18th Legion emerged as the only force capable of reaching the Xenos-infested planets to protect the civilian population. 19,000 Astartes rallied to aid the local inhabitants in forming defensive units. Through their combined efforts, the Imperial worlds managed to endure a relentless assault from millions of Orcs for an entire year. During this time, the Astartes successfully evacuated civilian populations from 3 worlds to relatively secure locations within the system. The protection of human lives came at a significant cost to the Astartes, yet such sacrifices were expected from Vulkan's sons. In their efforts to shield the mortals, the Legionnaires found themselves trapped on the desolate planet of Antaeum. Following Lord Commander Vaughan's strategy, this world was meant to act as a decoy, drawing the attention of the ravenous Xenos away from other targets. Situated far from the main forces of the Great Crusade, the doomed soldiers did not expect assistance from other expeditions and chose to make the ultimate sacrifice to protect the innocent. However, Vulkan soon learned of his son's dire situation. Having just begun to familiarize himself with the Legion, he immediately committed all available resources to orchestrate a rescue. Accompanied by 3,000 newly recruited Space Marines from Nocturne, along with a fleet of warships, combat vehicles and weapons designed to his specifications, Vulkan rushed to the beleaguered planet. With this fresh force, the Legion descended upon the Orc invaders, annihilating the largest of the space hulks orbiting Antaeum. Leading a squad of warriors, the Primarch stealthily infiltrated what the Orcs considered their ship, planting seismic charges at its core. Inspired by the unexpected arrival of their genetic father, the Space Marines renewed their assault against the Xenos, disregarding their dwindling ammunition and fatigue. The Orcs found themselves caught between the hammer and the anvil of noble fury, which proved mightier than their own. As the Xenos attempted to retreat, Vulkan's sons pursued them relentlessly, delivering them mercilessly to the flames of vengeance. After their hard-won victory, the 2 factions of the 18th Legion gathered on the coral sands of the desert planet, removing their helmets to greet one another. The Terrans were struck by the stark differences between Vulkan and the Space Marines from his homeworld as a unique mutation distinguished the Nocturnians. High levels of radiation and rare chemical elements in Nocturne's atmosphere had given them an onyx hue to their skin, regardless of their ethnic backgrounds. Additionally, this mutation enhanced their vision, allowing them to see in the infrared spectrum when necessary, a crucial adaptation in an environment often clouded by volcanic fumes. This characteristic manifested as bright red irises that glowed eerily in the dark. Despite these physical variations, the Terran Legionnaires immediately recognized their father, who had come to rescue them and lead them home. Overjoyed, the survivors knelt before Vulkan, but he urged them to rise, declaring that all his sons were equals, and he was no petty monarch requiring fealty. In a display of humility, the Primarch knelt before the Terrans to honor the countless lives they had saved and the heavy sacrifices they had made. During the reunion, Vulkan came across the gravely injured Lord Commander Cassian Vaughan and formally transferred command of the Legion to him, presenting the shattered power claw that had dealt him his fatal blow. This act solidified the bond between the 2 factions of the Legion, symbolizing their unity as brothers committed to each other's cause. In the aftermath of their first complete battle, Vulkan began to reshape his Legion, aiming to uphold the principles of honor, self-sacrifice, and bravery. Before encountering their genetic father, the 18th Legion had only a numerical designation and lacked a distinct identity. However, the soldiers of the Imperial Army who fought alongside Vulkan's sons began to refer to them as the Fearless Legion. In contrast, Vulkan chose to name his warriors salamanders, inspired by the most formidable lizards from his home planet. These ancient and fierce creatures were renowned for their fiery blood and resilient emerald skin, which was as strong as steel, and held significant meaning for the people of Nocturne. Vulkan selected this name not just for the reptile's ferocity. It also carried deeper implications. Predatory lizards are undeniably dangerous. Yet the inhabitants of Vulkan's world understood that when salamanders protect their young or their pack, they become nearly invincible. There is no force more fierce than a deep dragon, driven by the instinct to defend others. The Legion's emblem became the skull of Kesari, a lizard Vulkan had defeated during a contest with the Emperor. The creature's emerald skin adorned his armor, serving as a magnificent yet intimidating cloak. Vulkan's emerald armor was crafted to withstand even the most catastrophic blows, including direct nuclear strikes. His weapon, known as Dawnbringer, was a tool of unparalleled power, capable of breaching any defense and equipped with a built-in teleporter. Its immense weight meant that only Vulkan could wield it. Upon returning to Nocturne, Vulkan focused on enhancing the strengths of his legion while also introducing new capabilities. His companions constructed formidable fortifications, extensive arsenals, and manufactorums across his homeworld. What were once simple huts evolved into clusters of residential domes, communication relay stations, and vox towers. As specialists in seismology and geology emerged alongside traditional craftsmen, an Astartes garrison was established on the planet, dedicated exclusively to protecting the populace from potential Dark Elder attacks. Under Vulkan's leadership, life for the people of Nocturne improved significantly. He incorporated the best elements of the Imperium while preserving their unique cultural identity. The Primarch artfully blended the Emperor's ideals with the ancient traditions of Nocturne, leading to the establishment of what became known as the Promethean cult. Vulkan managed this integration so deftly that neither the Emperor nor the Inquisition could find fault with the core teachings of Nocturne, despite some harsh traditions being deemed barbaric. Among the salamanders, one of the most significant rituals involved branding, conducted before and after battles. The teachings of Prometheus did not advocate for the worship of deities or supernatural beings, but embraced the concept of the continuous cycle of a soul's rebirth into new forms. The cult in which Vulkan grew up did not create divisions among the Space Marines. He held immense respect for his Terran brothers, appreciating their contributions in all aspects of their endeavors. Vulkan framed each advancement not as a mere substitution, but as a progression that honored their history. Among the first Astartes to join the elite Pyre Guard, Vulkan's personal retinue were 7 of Terra's fiercest warriors. In a tribute to the fallen Lord Commander Cassian Vaughn, Vulkan meticulously crafted a unique dreadnought sarcophagus, dubbed the Iron Dragon, allowing the revered warrior to continue safeguarding the revitalized Legion. After years of preparation, the Salamanders rejoined the Great Crusade as a unified and formidable force, quickly establishing a reputation for their reliability in mission success. Vulkan instilled wisdom and purpose within his warriors, providing them with meaning that transcended the unending conflicts they faced. Unlike many Astartes from other legions, including their Primarchs, who often viewed mortals with disdain, leading to a chasm between demigods and humanity, Vulkan's outlook was refreshingly different. The disconnect among the Astartes can be understood. Most are taken from their families at a young age and typically lose all recollection of what it means to be human upon their ascension. However, Vulkan broke this mold. He fostered a tradition that encouraged the warriors of the 18th Legion to maintain their familial bonds. Throughout his life, he regularly visited his adoptive father, Nobel, and his childhood home as time allowed. The Salamanders formed deeper connections with the inhabitants of Nocturne than any other Astartes Legion, remaining engaged with their families throughout their lives. This closeness nurtured a profound concern for the fates of other mortals under the Emperor's protection, and a determination to prevent civilian casualties. Even after thousands of years, the descendants of the 18th Legion uphold these traditions, refusing to sever their ties with humanity. During peacetime, the salamanders reside alongside their families on Nocturne and Prometheus, often taking on leadership roles within their communities. While embarking on distant missions for the greater good of humanity, Vulkan's sons carry the memories of specific individuals, friends and loved ones, risking everything and venturing to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The salamanders have gained a reputation for being neither quick to anger nor reckless in combat. However, once they decide to unleash their wrath, it is as unstoppable and terrifying as the volcanic fury of the dark world they call home. Throughout the Great Crusade, the salamanders established themselves as a potent force, integrating seamlessly into the ranks of the Imperial army. One notable campaign involved the pacification of the planet Ibsen, where the sons of Vulkan allied with the Iron Hands and the Death Guard. Although the world was wild and largely uninhabitable, it harbored valuable mineral resources. However, Imperial forces faced fierce resistance from the Eldar residing on the planet. Though they were outmatched by a single Astartes legion, Ibsen was defended by 3, each led by its own Primarch. The Eldar fought valiantly, and soon human tribes from the planet aligned themselves with them. Vulkan was astonished to witness humans sympathizing with and aiding the Xenos, who had long tormented his homeland. Even more shocking were the moments when the Elder sought to protect the armed humans, wielding only sticks and stones from the advancing space marines. Oblivious to the presence of civilians in the combat zone, Vulkan was horrified to realize that he had inadvertently caused the deaths of countless men, women, and children. He had subjected the people of Ibsen to the same horrors the Eldar had inflicted upon his own kin. The fear directed at the Space Marines, rather than the Xenos, was entirely justified. Once the fighting ceased, Vulkan removed his helmet, intending to show the survivors that the Emperor's wars were not fought by monsters. However, the terror etched on the faces of the mortals told a different tale. While the Primarch could rationalize the deaths of warriors who accepted the risks of battle, the loss of innocent lives was a burden he could not bear. To prevent the spread of Xenos worship, Vulkan reluctantly commanded the total annihilation of the Ibsen population, including both Eldar and humans. He understood the brutality of his actions but felt no alternative existed. The world was later renamed Caldera and repopulated with new settlers. However, from that moment, Vulkan wrestled with the conflict between duty and morality, tormented by guilt over his choices. Deep down, he harbored a longing to return to his homeland after the Great War and live a simple farmer's life. For him, a hammer was not merely a weapon, but also a tool of creation. These aspirations seemed neither strange nor unrealistic to the mighty Lord of Drakes. He believed his brothers yearned for a similar peaceful existence. Shortly after the campaign on Ibsen, the Salamander's Legion turned its attention to restoring order on Kara-Atan. This planet also drew the presence of Konrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, the Titans of Legio Ignis, and various regiments from the Imperial Army. The two Primarchs held fundamentally different views on warfare, which quickly led to a confrontation that nearly escalated into fratricide. Night Haunter found Vulkan's compassion for mortals perplexing. He could not understand why his brother valued the lives of these beings, distinguishing some as more important than others. For Kurz, this behavior was completely alien. He felt disdain for all mortals and struggled to articulate even the simplest aspects of human relationships. Instead, the Night Haunter resorted to his favored method of demonstrating their similarities, through torture. Under Konrad Kurz's command, an entire city on Kara-Atan was eradicated. True to his nature, the Primarch aimed to instill terror in the hearts of the planet's inhabitants, believing fear was the most effective weapon in warfare. When Vulkan discovered this atrocity, he was consumed with rage. However, his emotional response played directly into Kurz's scheme. The Night Haunter sought to provoke his noble brother into an action that would reveal their unsettling similarities, more than Vulkan cared to admit. The senseless slaughter of millions horrified Vulkan. Grasping his warhammer, he nearly charged at Kurz, but hesitated, halted by the flames engulfing the ruined city, reminding him of the horrors witnessed on Ibsen. Each Primarch had distinct perspectives and strategies, yet every campaign resulted in loss. Vulkan struggled with the guilt of his past actions, haunted by the knowledge that he might be responsible for further destruction of worlds before it all ended. In his fury over the devastation, Vulkan confronted Kurz, unleashing his wrath upon an already defeated elder warrior who knelt before him. The Drukhari witch appeared young and beautiful, concealing her true nature as a merciless killer. Kurz ensured Vulkan was deceived by her appearance, leading him to believe he had just incinerated a child. Driven by anger and goaded by his brother, Vulkan attempted to strangle Conrad Kurz, who offered no resistance, reveling in the opportunity to show Vulkan that he too was a murderer like the other Primarchs. Following the devastation on Karatan, Vulkan expressed his disdain for both Kurz's actions and those of Rogel Dawn and Horus Lupercal, once considered close allies. This encounter marked the beginning of a bitter feud between Vulkan and Night Haunter. When Kurz's betrayal was unveiled, the Emperor ordered 7 full legions of Space Marines to assault the traitorous forces in the Istvan system. Vulkan, sensing that Horus would ultimately meet defeat, believed he would regret his fall from grace. What Vulkan did not realize was that 4 of the 7 legions had already turned their backs on the Emperor's light. As the initial landing craft broke through the clouds, the traitorous artillery stationed above Istvan 5 erupted into a barrage of fire. Despite this, nearly 40,000 Loyalist Astartes touched down on the planet, though most landing craft were damaged, with many destroyed while still airborne. The 10th Legion, led by Ferrus Manus, advanced on the heart of the traitors, while the Raven Guards secured the left flank and the Salamanders moved to the right. The Salamanders advanced with unwavering determination, their vast numbers creating the impression that the black sands of Istvan had been swallowed by a tide of emerald. Vulkan led from the front, flanked by his funeral guard, 2 battalions of Terminators, and several dreadnoughts that shook the air with their autocannon fire. In the landing zone, Vulkan confronted units of the Death Guard, who had once been his allies during the tragic campaign on Ibsen. His armor was resistant to the relentless hail of bolter fire, yet the forces of Mortarion had acquired more insidious weaponry since then. Before Vulkan's eyes, the 15th Reconnaissance Company fell victim to a newly introduced poisonous gas. While the Death Guard donned protective masks, the Salamander Space Marines fought on without helmets. More than 100 warriors from the 15th Company perished, choking on their own blood as their bodies twisted grotesquely within their tattered armor. The Death Guard gained the upper hand over the remnants of the Scouting Company and began to encircle the remaining Salamanders. Yet Vulkan single-handedly countered their advance, cutting down one son of Mortarion after another. Soon, his funeral guard joined the battle, transforming the landscape into a bloody melee drenched in crimson. The mist above turned red with the blood of the fallen. It was amid this chaos that Vulkan heard a frantic voice calling his name. His brother Angron, commander of the 12th Legion. 30 World Eaters charged at a small group of Salamander Space Marines, outnumbering them more than 4 to 1. The Berserk warriors favoured brutal close-quarters combat, and many fell to bolter fire before they reached the Loyalist positions. However, those who remained pressed on despite their injuries, driven by a relentless fury fueled by the implants rumoured to be in their skulls, traits attributed to their genetic father. At the Battle of Istvan 5, the Salamanders came to believe these tales. As the primary forces engaged in a brutal clash, Vulkan's Terminators faced off against Angron's elite bodyguards, both Primarchs preparing for an epic confrontation. The Red Angel was poised to battle the Dawnbringer, Vulkan's formidable warhammer. But before they could collide, a barrage of rockets tore through the sky, igniting a cataclysmic explosion between the brothers. Nearby Space Marines were incinerated instantly, even those encased in Terminator armor reduced to ash. The surviving Salamanders quickly formed a protective perimeter around their genetic father, resolute in shielding him from the relentless assault of the World Eaters. Though battered, the Astartes of the 18th Legion pressed onward, refusing to break. Amid his own turmoil, Vulkan felt a glimmer of hope as he learned reinforcements were on the way. Thousands of landing modules burst forth from the clouds, bearing the symbols of the Alpha Legion, the Iron Warriors, the Word-Bearers, and the Lords of Night. Vulkan commanded a strategic retreat, allowing the incoming legionnaires to earn their share of glory in the battle against the traitors. In contrast, Angron melted away into the chaos that followed the firestorm. The Raven Guard and Salamanders regrouped at the landing zone, but Ferrus Manus remained resolute and did not follow. Years later, Vulkan would blame himself for not dissuading his hot-headed brother from chasing the traitors. The Salamanders set up camp on the northern side, while the newly arrived Iron Warriors settled nearby. True to the customs of the 4th Legion, they began fortifying their positions immediately. Armoured bastions emerged from the landing crafts, and colossal cannons were positioned on the slopes behind them. Thousands of Iron Warriors formed ranks behind the heavy tanks, appearing as lifeless as the cold weapons they wielded. They regarded the Salamanders with complete indifference, raising suspicions in Vulkan's mind which were confirmed by his brother Perturabo's knowing gaze. This was betrayal. Bloodied and exhausted from their encounters with the Death Guard and the World Eaters, the Salamanders faced not allies, but new adversaries aiming their countless weapons at them. No weapon could wound Vulkan more deeply than the betrayal of his brothers. Enraged, he charged toward Perturabo's forces, leaving his Pyre Guard behind. In the initial moments of conflict, both sides suffered heavy losses as Astartes fell victim to crossfire when the betrayal became apparent. Despite the devastating toll, the Salamanders continued their assault. Vulkan, ordered to fight on even at the risk of his life, nearly led the 18th Legion to its demise. As Loyalist forces advanced on the Iron Warriors' positions, Perturabo unleashed a missile that streaked across the sky like a massive fiery horseshoe. The descending arc of fire obliterated everything in its path. Those unfortunate enough to be caught in the impact zone were hurled into the air like empty suits of armor. Salamander tanks crumbled, their crews incinerated, while the few survivors of the Inferno were left maimed by the ensuing shrapnel storm. A colossal crater was carved into the ground, littered with wreckage and the remains of Vulkan's sons. An electromagnetic pulse rendered the Vox links useless, cutting off all means of tactical coordination. The only available strategy for the survivors was to retreat to the landing site. Perturabo dispatched the Salamanders with ease, as if they were mere fragile glass. In stark contrast to their valiant defense at Istvan V, the loyal Space Marines faced near total annihilation. Following Ferrus Manus's death at the hands of Fulgrim, the Iron Hands, Raven Guard and Salamanders could no longer sustain their combat efforts and withdrew from the planet. In the aftermath, few witnesses claimed that Vulkan had sustained grave injuries and was evacuated aboard a ship with his Pyre Guard. Yet, the true fate of the Salamander Primarch was far more dire. Unlike many of his brothers, Vulkan endured the missile strike from Perturabo and continued to fight against the Iron Warriors and Night Lords that surrounded him. Accepting his likely fate, he was resolute in taking as many traitors down with him as possible. He battled fiercely, but was ultimately overwhelmed by the sheer number of foes, succumbing to his wounds and losing consciousness. Miraculously, he did not perish. Seizing the moment, Conrad Kurz approached, eager to torment the brother he despised, yet could never fully comprehend. When Vulkan regained consciousness, he found himself shackled in heavy chains aboard the Night Lord's ship. Over the following months, Conrad Kurz unleashed the full extent of his sadistic tendencies, aiming to break Vulkan's body and spirit before ending his life. This task, however, proved to be an insurmountable challenge. Each time Kurz believed he had succeeded in killing Vulkan, the battered Primarch would inexplicably regenerate, returning to his previous form. Vulkan was revealed to be an Eternal, a being with the ability for constant cellular regeneration, rendering him effectively immortal, much like their father, the Emperor of Mankind. In his rage, Kurz resolved to kill Vulkan as many times as necessary to rid himself of his brother's enduring presence. He decapitated Vulkan, tore out his throat and slashed his chest. Yet none of these acts brought him the satisfaction he craved. In a fit of frustration, the Night Haunter commanded his Space Marines to unleash a barrage of bolter fire, disembowel Vulkan, stuff him into the engine turbine of a spaceship, strip him of his armor, and cast him into the void of space. Yet each time, Vulkan stubbornly returned to life, further fueling Kurz's fury. Realizing that physically killing Vulkan was futile, Kurz aimed to crush his brother's spirit, convincing him he was as monstrous as Kurz himself. Vulkan faced relentless trials, devoid of any hope, and though he tried to withstand the torment, the psychological toll began to show. In his darkest moments, he was haunted by a twisted apparition of Ferrus Manus, once his close ally. Vulkan recognized that he wasn't seeing the true Gorgon. The vision was malevolent and resembled Konrad Kurz, but guilt over his brother's death at Istvan V prevented the horrific illusion from fading. At Kurz's command, Perturabo constructed a sinister chamber, a vast trap, where innocent men, women and children were imprisoned at one end, while Vulkan stood at the other, precariously holding a heavy block of stone above their heads. Perturabo's design allowed for no mistakes. Everything was calculated perfectly. Vulkan could hold the weight just long enough for the innocents to realize their grave danger, their screams piercing the air and tormenting the compassionate Primarch. Despite his anguish and willingness to sacrifice himself, the Lord of Drakes ultimately faltered, unable to maintain his grip, leading to the horrific demise of the innocents. The subsequent round of torment was even more insidious. Konrad Kurz subjected Vulkan to extended deprivation of food and water, only to later present him with a sumptuous feast filled with tantalizing dishes and drinks. Weak and bound to a chair, Vulkan was unable to reach the food laid out before him. Yet, the true cruelty of this scenario was not solely in his own suffering. Beside Vulkan were mortals bearing the marks of starvation. Their hands had been severed, leaving charred stumps from which knives and forks were affixed. Some managed to grasp scraps of food, but the cutlery had been deliberately elongated, rendering it impossible for them to feed themselves. With his remaining strength, Vulkan shouted the only solution that came to mind, urging the mortals to feed one another. However, Konrad Kurz had anticipated this plea and ensured that the victims were stripped of both sight and hearing, rendering them unable to interact. Thus, the shackled salamander Primarch endured weeks beside these slowly dying humans. Only after the last of them succumbed did the Night Haunter reappear, dispatching Vulkan this time with a table fork. Perturabo then introduced another instrument of suffering. Vulkan found himself confined within a specially designed battle sarcophagus, lined with spikes and blades both inside and out. He was rendered unable to control his own body, turned into a living puppet, trapped in a mechanized nightmare. In this manner, Konrad Kurz forced his brother to unwittingly become the executioner of several Imperial Army soldiers and Raven Guard veterans. When one of the war machine's limbs was damaged, a Salamander Legionnaire stepped in front of Vulkan, allowing the Primarch to take his own life with a sword attached to his arm. For Night Haunter, the torment inflicted upon Vulkan's body and mind was secondary to his desire to prove that his brother was no different from himself, a monster. With the assistance of several psychopriests, Konrad Kurz ensnared Vulkan in an illusion, convincing him that he must kill Corvus Corax to gain his freedom. Knowing Vulkan's noble nature, Kurz taunted him, claiming that if he surrendered and struck Corax down, he would witness his brother enduring horrific torture upon resurrection. Yet even these threats could not compel Vulkan to deliver a fatal blow. When the illusion shattered, an infuriated Konrad Kurz killed Vulkan once more. The next torment devised by Perturabo was a diabolical labyrinth that defied the laws of physics. At its center lay Vulkan's Warhammer, Dawnbringer, alongside two dying Salamander Space Marines. The labyrinth was constructed in such a manner that any attempt to mentally map its corridors became futile after only a few steps. While Vulkan struggled to navigate his way to his dying sons, Konrad Kurz attacked relentlessly from the shadows, stabbing but deliberately avoiding delivering a fatal blow. In Vulkan's darkest hour, the Emperor appeared before him, taking the form of a mortal summoner. He reminded his son of his unwavering presence, soothing Vulkan's shattered mind and replenishing his strength. Inspired by this manifestation, Vulkan saw a glimmer of salvation in his brother. He began to taunt Konrad Kurz, labeling him a frightened child and the weakest Primarch. This mockery enraged Night Haunter, who, in a fit of fury, opened a path to the labyrinth's center, where Dawnbringer lay protected by an energy shield. Though the salamander warriors chained to the walls had perished, Vulkan stifled his grief, recognizing that their deaths were merely instruments of torment meant to break him. Konrad Kurz, however, lacked such clarity. Vulkan reminded his brother that all the other Primarchs felt pity for him, confessing that he had always held back his strength during their training bouts for fear of harming Kurz. Those words sent Nighthaunter into a blind rage, and he lunged at Vulkan with his blade drawn, only to be easily overpowered. The Lord of Drakes then used Kurz's body as a weapon, smashing it against the energy shield that protected Dawnbringer. Consistent with his past choices, Vulkan opted against taking his brother's life. He believed that the Emperor had poured his vast intellect into creating suns designed to rise above humanity. Through the Emperor's unparalleled wisdom, the Primarchs reached levels of existence that mere mortals could hardly imagine. Yet, alongside their extraordinary qualities, some of the Emperor's sons bore vices that mirrored the darkest aspects of humankind. Vulkan felt a deep sense of pity for Konrad Kurz, whom he regarded as the most flawed of them all. Despite this empathy, he could not bring himself to slay his own brother. Instead, he grasped his hammer and activated the built-in teleporter, propelling himself into the upper atmosphere of Macragge, the center of Ultramar. As he descended towards the surface, flames engulfed his body. Just before succumbing to death once again, he found solace in the thought that he would soon be resurrected within Guilliman's realm. Later, Konrad Kurz, having escaped from the Dark Angel's flagship, made his way to Macragge, intent on finishing Vulkan, only to be thwarted by the other Primarchs. Ultimately, the Lord of Drakes did meet his end. It is commonly believed that he was struck down by John Grammaticus, an Eternal affiliated with the mysterious Cabal organization. The weapon used against him was the Spear of Fulgurite, a unique material formed from the earth during an ancient conflict when the Emperor unleashed his immense power against the Chaos Gods. Fulgurite is said to be the only substance capable of permanently killing an Eternal. In the aftermath of Vulkan's death, Imperium Secundus became a sanctuary for many surviving members of the 18th Legion. Lost but still committed to serving the Emperor, these warriors sought purpose by relocating to Guilliman's domain. As the Salamanders mourned their Primarch, convinced of his demise, the Ultramarines held a grand funeral ceremony in his honor. Vulkan was interred in a golden tomb, clad in his armor, with his warhammer resting in his lifeless hands. The Spear of Fulgurite remained embedded in his chest, as none dared to remove it. While the Ultramarines believed they had given Vulkan a proper send-off, the coldness of the golden sarcophagus starkly contrasted with the rites of the Promethean cult. Led by their first captain, Artellus Numeon, the surviving Salamanders persuaded the ruling Primarchs of Imperium Secundus to permit the transfer of Vulkan's body back to Nocturne. They clung to the hope that the Lord of Drakes might rise once more. Their belief was not entirely baseless. En route to Macragge, their ship had become lost in the warp, facing the possibility of vanishing forever until Magnus the Red Soul Shard intervened. For reasons unknown, which Numeon interpreted as a gesture of brotherly affection for Vulkan, Magnus guided the vessel to Ultramar and planted the idea in the minds of the Salamanders that a meaningful sacrifice could prompt Vulkan's resurrection. To achieve this daunting task, the Astartes of the 18th Legion had to traverse the ruin storm, confront a fleet of word-bearers and the Death Guard, and ultimately defend Nocturne against the traitors' forces. Once their enemies were defeated, the Space Marines performed a proper funeral ceremony, lowering their Primarch's body into the molten lava. Thus, Vulkan was restored from the unbound flame at Mount Deathfire. Upon his resurrection, Vulkan found himself in a fugue-like state, struggling to recall his past. He awoke deep within Mount Deathfire, where he encountered an old man who introduced himself as Deathfire personified. This enigmatic figure encouraged Vulkan to journey to Terra and guided him to two items that he had no memory of creating: the Thunderhammer Urdracula and the Talisman of 7 Hammers. When Vulkan regained consciousness, he stood at the base of Mount Deathfire, discovered by 3 of his loyal legionaries. Artok Abidemi, Barek Zaitos, and Egan Gargo. He instructed them to return in 3 days and forbade them from speaking to anyone about his return to Nocturne. Upon their return, now known as Vulkan's Draksword, the Primarch utilized his talisman to open a webway portal deep beneath Nocturne. What followed was a challenging expedition through a series of webway tunnels and exits that ultimately led to Terra. Vulkan and his Draksword found themselves in a satellite realm of Commorragh, where they engaged in battle against Dark Eldar forces. They soon encountered the fleet of Shadrach Medicine, who was actively fighting a guerrilla war against Horus. Vulkan discovered Medicine's fleet in turmoil, with the cult of the Gorgon claiming to have resurrected Ferrus Manus. Upon meeting this so-called reborn Ferrus, Vulkan realized it was merely a mechanical puppet, with one of Ferrus's metallic arms attached. Heartbroken by the indignity inflicted upon his brother, Vulkan shattered the puppet with his hammer. Choosing not to participate in Medicine's war, Vulkan departed during the Battle of the Aragnia Chain, heading for Caldera. Upon arrival, he was welcomed by Eldar, who directed him to a new webway portal on the orders of Eldred Ulthran. Once again inside the webway, Vulkan and his Draksword travelled to Kalistar, a realm long abandoned since the war within the webway. In Kalistar they were besieged by demons, and Vulkan found himself locked in combat with the great unclean one, Agulba. Utilizing the Talisman of 7 Hammers, he not only vanquished the demon, but ensured it suffered a true death. Yet, still under attack from demonic hordes, Vulkan and his companions were rescued by Eldred, who revealed himself as the Old Man of Mount Deathfire. Informing Vulkan that access to the Imperial dungeon had been sealed by the Emperor, Eldred opened a new portal that transported Vulkan and his warriors directly to the front of the Imperial Palace. The Salamanders pressed forward toward the palace gates, where they were welcomed by Rogel Dawn. The Lord of Drakes was filled with joy at seeing one of his brothers and embraced Dawn, fully aware that the reserved Primarch would never openly display his emotions. Upon their meeting, the Emperor of Mankind informed Vulkan that he had guided him in the creation of the Urdrakula and the 7 Hammers talisman. Powerful artifact was crucial, capable of obliterating the throne world should Horus prevail. The Emperor had forged this doomsday device through Vulkan, who was appointed to activate it if the need arose. The Lord of Drakes then installed the 7 Hammers talisman into the Golden Throne and stood vigilant at the Eternity Gate, awaiting the final confrontation for Terra. The fate of the 18th Legion after the Great Heresy is shrouded in mystery, perhaps known only to the silent librarians of the Salamanders. Nonetheless, it is noted that when Guilliman penned the Codex Astartes and ordered the restructuring of the legions into smaller chapters of no more than 1,000 space marines, Vulkan sided with those who opposed the Ultramarines Primarch's initiative. However, like his brothers, the Lord of Drakes ultimately came to terms with this change, recognizing that the integrity of the Legion was not worth jeopardizing the Imperium's safety once more. The fact that the Salamanders had suffered significant losses at Istvan V, leaving them barely able to form a single chapter, heavily influenced his decision. The ultimate fate of Vulkan remains enigmatic. Various accounts suggest that the Primarch led his chapter for 3,000 years, following the Horus heresy, before embarking on an undisclosed mission into the unknown void. Adding to the mystery, prior to his disappearance, Vulkan entrusted his sons with the Tome of Fire, which contained the locations of 9 powerful artifacts. The text revealed that a millennium after the heresy, the Lord of Drakes concealed these relics across the galaxy, passing them down to his sons. The Tome of Fire states that once the Salamanders locate all the items, Vulkan will deem them worthy and return from his distant journey to Nocturne. 41st millennium, 5 of these relics had been identified, with 3, including Khazari's mantle, safeguarded in Vulkan's homeland. The other 2 were held by the Master of the Chapter within the fortress on Prometheus. The remaining 4 remain lost to time. Who can say how long it will take for the Chapter of the Salamanders to reclaim their most compassionate protector and return him to humanity?